welcome to Dialogue on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing. Social media has brought us new ways of communication and expression, but it's also brought us dangers which perhaps have been overlooked or ignored, as some argue. Social media's potential menace was highlighted in China earlier this month by the suicide of a teenager who had been victimized online. What can we do to help prevent similar tragedies in the future? And how can we protect ourselves from becoming the victims? Do we need new legislation or greater supervision? To discuss all of these issues, we're joined here by Professor Shi Anbing from Tsinghua University. Welcome, Professor. And also, we're joined by Mr. Edward Lehman, who is the Managing Director of the law firm Lehman, Lee and Xu, here based in China. Welcome as well. Gentlemen, before we go to a discussion with the two of you, let's take a look at this background report.
When an 18-year-old high school student Anqi visited this clothes shop in Donghai County of Lufeng City in Guangdong Province, little did she know what impact it would have on her. Just a few days after her visit, she found she had been labeled a thief on a microblog by the shop owner. The owner, with the surname Cai, had posted surveillance images of Qi in the shop with the caption, "This girl is a thief. She often comes to my shop with a dog. Please repost and hunt the thief for me." No sooner had the post gone out than people jumped into it and began to search for this thief. It wasn't long before Anqi's private information, ranging from her name, school, home address, and personal photos, were posted online. What followed next was abuse online. Soon, her school was talking about her. Unable to take it anymore, on December the 2nd, Anqi asked for 2 days sick leave from school. The next day, she committed suicide by jumping into the river. But not after she posted on the same microblog this line, "It's the first time that I'm not afraid of the river." Anqi was no more. After her death, her sister criticized the shop owner for what she had done. On December the 6th, Anqi's father brought a lawsuit to Lufeng People's Court against the shop owner Cai, accusing her of internet defamation. Now, thousands of people have left messages online vouching for the right to privacy. On the legal front, experts say there are still many gray areas.
The public often see the Internet as a platform for judgment and publish their remarks without judicial authorization. People's privacy and personality could be hurt by certain remarks on the Internet. The law is vague on dealing with such problems. How does one gauge and define responsibility on the Internet still requires clarification.
Some say on the Internet, everyone is a moral guardian. However, how far people take this and for what purpose is a dangerous territory. The smallest issues triggering a majority of the public's anger is a cause for concern. And who knows this better than Anqi's family?
A very tragic story about the 18-year-old girl. To respond to this specific story, we have once again Mr. Edward Lehman and also Professor Shi Anbing with us in the studio. Your first reaction to the story?
I think this is another very impressive anecdote to let us think the difference between the reality and the virtual community. Does the law and regulation of the real world apply to the virtual world or not?
At this moment, it seems there is a divide. And Mr. Lehman?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is obviously it's shocking, it's sad that someone took their life and that this had to happen, and now the owner of the shop is in jail. So it's a tragedy, but I think
she's in jail. Has she been accused?
No, the shop owner was a man or a female, I think, but is now in jail. But the woman who was the alleged thief, this Anqi, she was not accused of the crime. She was accused by the shop owner, but not by the police or not by any kind of authority. And so he took it upon himself, or the shop owner took it upon themselves to post the picture and said that she was a thief, try to identify who this thief was, and then the folks went out cyber hunting and found her. And then there was a lot of pressure put on her, and then this pressure made her commit suicide.
Is this a specific and very typical case of cyberbullying, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent it is, because it's a form of vigilantism, which can be positive. There can be positive things with this kind of cyber hunting and cyber bullying. I mean, there could be positive changes in people, perhaps, but typically they're negative types of things. And so what they're doing is they're the judge and the jury, and in this case the executioner. This is the public, the netizens, without having any trial, without having the police involved, without having anything else. So this is maybe not a good thing at all times, because the public maybe doesn't have all the information. So I think it can be bad.
I think we also use the word bullying. So when we mean bullying, it's usually the target was those people who has the marginalized power, like juvenile, gay people, or disabled people. So those people have become victims. I think particularly this case would suit the definition of cyberbullying, because it's not an equal communication, but rather a kind of more powerful community kind of have their own rights on the less powerful community.
What do you mean by more powerful and less powerful? Who are the more powerful and who are the less powerful?
Of course, the mainstream society. Like a shop owner, in this case, of course, he's victimized a juvenile. The juvenile would be a kind of marginalized or less powerful community.
But it's very interesting you raise this thing, because there are so many details about this case that we do not know specifically for us to judge. First of all, this girl is an 18-year-old girl. So she's at the verge of being an adult and being an adolescent. So if the shop owner, only knowing her from looking at the image of the video, it is very hard most of the time to judge whether she's a juvenile or she's actually a grown-up. And secondly, at this moment, as far as I understand, the shop owner has not been formally arrested. This is only a case being raised up by the father of this girl who committed suicide against the shop owner, Tsai, who only, at this moment, we only know a surname, and we do not have his or her picture either. So this is still an investigation going on. And thirdly, at this moment, we do not know necessarily whether there is already a finished investigation about whether this girl stole or not anything from that specific shop as claimed by Tsai, the shop owner. So there are a lot of mysteries around this case that we do not know. However, what we want to discuss today mainly is this case, without knowing these details, can be a typical case of cyberbullying. Secondly, how can we look at the difference between cyber hunting and cyberbullying? I think these are the things that we have to narrow down today in order to discuss this specific case and all of the phenomena related to it. So on that point, Mr. Shi, what is your judgment? Without all the details being known at this moment about the story, what do you think, whether it is a typical one, cyberbullying, or not a typical story?
Before we make any judgment, of course, I think today we're going to talk about some general implication rules. So I noticed that yesterday, actually, the official of the State Council Information Office, who is the highest regulating body of Internet in China, already had a very clear remarks about this incident. He said something we need to redefine what we mean by human flash search. So I would think the key concept here is, again, just like when we talk about media ethic, we want to talk about a very important concept called actual malice or intentional malice. When you expose all information on newspaper or internet, whether you have this intentional malice, of course, it depends on the court decide whether you have the intentional malice or not based on the fact and evidences.
Right.
No, I agree. I mean, it's about intentional malice, and it's what they've come out with the rules. It's got to be viewed by 5,000 people potentially, and then or forwarded 5,000 times.
500 times.
500 times and 5,000 viewing of that. And so I think they're moving in the right direction. I think that there has to be some kind of legislation. I mean, we have legislation in many other countries right now, and this is something that people have to deal with. The irony, I think, and this is where I differ a little bit with Professor Shi, is that it's not just the powerful always against the less powerful, because I think that the shop owner themselves then became the victim of cyber hunting or cyber bullying when that person was detained. So after the person, after An Qi committed suicide, so all of a sudden this powerful, or what was one time a powerful person, it's been flipped on him or her, this shopkeeper Tsai. So I think that bullying can happen at all kinds of levels. Yeah, I think that the groups he was talking about are especially vulnerable. There's no question about it. I also think mental health is a big issue here too. I think that with an 18-year-old, and I think just in America and China, is there enough mental health professionals? Because this was a girl at risk. Did this happen to her, and was it a tragedy? Yes. Should she have gotten or sought advice? Maybe she reached out to someone but didn't do it. Maybe the society frowns upon that. And so that's another aspect of cyberbullying, is the people that are especially vulnerable and the people who don't seek help, and there isn't guidance to protect these people. And typically in the United States, they don't tell teachers, they don't tell other administrators, they don't tell the police that this has happened to them because they're afraid to, and then they decide to take their lives. But
I guess here as well, because these kids are obviously, An Qi, as one of them, must be having her own little world, and obviously it is very hard for them to reach out to the others. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible for her to commit suicide, saying at the very last moment of her life, this is the very first time I'm not afraid of river anymore. This is a very tragic story. But on the other hand, we have to analyze it with a calm mind, not just being emotional toward this girl, but rather looking at the whole phenomenon. So by looking at it, can we say cyber hunting as a result is not going to be a phenomenon that should be encouraged? Because this girl specifically, the reason why she committed suicide is because after the shop owner posted her photos from the video on the internet and claiming her as the thief, then a lot of people who did not know her, did not know the shop owner either, just went on the internet and tried to do this cyber hunting about this 18-year-old girl. That is why there were so much personal information about her being leaked onto the internet, and she felt so much hurt. But the thing is, what is the difference between cyberbullying and cyber hunting? Should the latter be legal or illegal? And whose say is it to say whether one type of cyber hunting is legal and is right, the other type of cyber hunting is not legal and is not right? Mr. Lehman.
Well, I think that with cyber hunting, a human flash search engine, there have been some positive results that have come from there. I think that the netizens would say that there's been positive results, and there's been tragic results. So that's the difficult thing. In cyberbullying, the problem is we all carry this phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's glued to us.
And you turn it off at this moment.
Of course I did. But I brought it as a demonstration only to say because we almost can't live without it. Right. And so cyberbullying comes into our homes, which used to be the walls of our homes were where we were protected, and now I have to have this attached to me so someone can bully another person on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on a smartphone. And so that I think that the opportunities for bullying can become very prevalent.
Exactly. We all know cyberbullying, when you just heard the word, it's a negative word. Of course it's not right, but then cyber hunting at certain moment could contribute to cyberbullying. But at other times, cyber hunting is a phenomenon being encouraged, even advocated by the government to search for certain specific individuals. So here's the thing, that's the question we have. When is the right time to do cyber hunting? When is not the right time to do cyber hunting? Because cyber hunting involves the general public, and the public has to decide on their own as to when to do it and when not to do it, when to contribute, when not to contribute, Professor Shi.
So if we treat the internet as a media, of course, we will define whether it's a kind of public discourse platform or just a private purpose. So I think in this case, if we allow this cyber hunting or cyberbullying, we have to decide whether this kind of
we do not allow cyberbullying, but cyber hunting sometimes is allowed. So what is time should it be allowed?
Of course, it has to be done in terms of public interest. But when you say who decide, of course the court. I would say if in a kind of system we have a court system, the court of course have the final say in deciding whether it is just like New York Times.
Okay, so let's
just
develop a little bit one step further of what you just said. What you are saying is that as long as it is the court that is asking the public to do cyber hunting, that is legal, and that is for the right reason. If it is not the court that is asking the public to do cyber hunting, the public, they're doing on their own, or they are being asked by certain individuals for quote-unquote help, then that is not illegal.
Yes.
Legal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think this is in a kind of rationalized society. But of course, in China now, there's not many cases actually related to this media trial. Because usually what is actually not allowed is that the court will defend on the interest of some power elite or certain interest group. So this is a problem right now. Probably in the United States, when New York Times has won their the media trial, they of course defend on the right of the free flow of information. So this is probably the key to understanding what is exactly this cyber hunting. Because if the cyber hunting is done in the public interest, of course, and we have the court system decide this is the right purpose, we can do it.
So this is becoming complicated because you are talking about a general rule, and immediately you talk about huge cases of exceptions. So this is very hard to define. Mr. Lehman, what is your understanding?
Well, let me give you an example of how I think it's worked in America in a positive way, which is sort of cyber hunting before this internet even began. We have something called America's Most Wanted, which was started by a gentleman. And these were convicted criminals that were on the run, or these were convicted or indicted or whatever they were that were on the run that they were looking for, and they would put these things out. So there's already been a judicial process that's been in place. Either they were convicted or they've been indicted or arrested in some way, shape, or form and got free. And then this was trying to search for these criminals, which they were deemed in some way, shape, or form criminals, right? So in this way, there was vigilantism, whereas people identified, oh, I saw that guy who's the American Most Wanted, or this woman on the wanted list,
so your point
and turned
is?
them in. Well, just like Professor Scher said, which is the court's already made some kind of decision. I mean, in the shopkeeper's case and in on Qi's case, there was no judicial decision, and so to go after them is a very difficult thing. I mean, so I think it can be used positively or it can be used as a terrible weapon. You know.
Ideally, we would have kind of self-regulation and outside regulation. But now in China, the problem is that we rely solely on the regulation from government authority or some kind of outside forces. And then with more and more cases like this emerged, we probably have this kind of media literacy, that people, like the shop owner, will have the media literacy to judge whether he should release information or not. If he had this kind of rationalized media literacy and this is kind of self-regulation.
Well, the other thing is again, there's this huge disparity between an 18-year-old and their understanding of computer and the parents who don't have any understanding probably of internet technology or smartphones or less. You know, so the other issue is that we've got an age gap where there's an online generation. These people have grown up with these computers and smartphones and bulletin board services, and the judiciary and the police and these maybe have not grown up with this, and so we've got this educational divide, and certainly in educational institutions
let me
as well.
just wrap up the very first part of the discussion by understanding both of your points. So what you're saying is, as long as it is not a so-called cyber hunting being asked by the judiciary, then it is not going to be legal. Is that what you're saying? And then it should not be done on the internet. Is that what you're saying?
It's a safer way, I think. I mean, as long as there's been some due diligence, some due process.
All right, but then the other thing is the internet as a tool does allow people to do many of the things that they would not be able to do when there was no internet. And therefore, people want to play a bigger role in the society, and that is the fascinating part of the social media. Can you discipline it as if you were disciplining a world that is without a social media? And we have to discuss all of these points in the latter half of our program. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching Dialogue on CCTV News. With me in the studio once again, we have Mr. Edward Lehman, who is the Managing Director of Lehman, Lee & Xu Law Firm here based in China, and also Professor Shi Anbing from Tsinghua University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for helping us to understand the details of a specific tragedy involving an 18-year-old An Qi, who after being accused online as the thief by a clothes shop owner, committed suicide. But there are so many things that we do not know about that case that we will not give a specific definition of who is guilty and who is not. What we know is that she committed suicide, and that is a tragedy. On the other hand, though, it is very interesting that we talk about this case because it goes directly to the very soul of a big legal debate we have here in China. That is, whether one person is guilty until proved innocent, or whether one person is innocent until proved guilty. We look at one detail of the story, that is, the shop owner caught her on the video and believed An Qi, the 18-year-old who committed suicide later, was the thief. And therefore the shop owner posted the photo of her onto the internet and caused all of these tragedies. But then, according to the Chinese legal system, Mr. Demon, what is the principle that we have here in China? Is it innocent until proved guilty, or guilty until proved innocent? If it was the latter, did the shop owner committed big mistakes, or rather they were just going with people's practice, people's belief of what should be done?
With a case where you could be held for up to 4 years without a trial, you're oftentimes can be considered guilty until proven innocent. With that, and you can also be detained for months before the first interview, before you have a right to interview. So in China, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but sometimes it's really guilty until proven innocent. The concept in America and in other places is it should be innocent until proven guilty, and it should. And I think that China wants to do that, but they want to investigate.
There's a transition period of time that we are at this moment.
That's correct. So I think that there's some ambiguity on the practice versus what the ideal is. So, the shop owner went ahead and said, guilty, find this woman, and I'm going to get restitution, and she's going to be humiliated. And that's a very bad situation to be in, to allow privacy of this individual to go
But at the same time, there's a very clear difference between what is being said legally and what this shop owner is doing, because the shop owner did not have any order coming from the police suggesting this woman might be guilty and therefore let's find her. So those are totally different cases.
Correct.
But we also want to talk about from educators' perspective, whether media is a public space or a private space. Especially for internet, now we have a kind of ambiguous line between these two different arguments. But of course, in this case, we have to decide whether the shop owner abused the media platform. So again, I would say in this instance, again, I went back to my point earlier, media should be a platform only for public interest. So this is probably also, when you release any information on internet, you have to bear some social responsibility. Of course, the committee suicide could be one possible consequences that you can think in your mind, because this is a girl, it's a teenager girl. So he might be very vulnerable in this case.
All right. Public interest have been a word repeated by the two of you. But then who is there, once again, to define the public interest? At what time? Those are, of course, very crucial questions, because one of the things people have been asking around the world over the past few months since Mr. Edward Snowden came out and talked about all of the so-called practices done by governments around the world toward private information of their citizens, is that people do not believe sometimes anymore in the integrity of the government when the government's coming out and preach people what to do and what not to do. So that is a legitimate question, I guess, to ask here, Mr. Lehman. That is, when the government's integrities about protecting the private rights and privacy of its individual citizens are being questioned, do the governments still have the power and the legitimacy and the persuasion capability to ask individuals to obey the same principle?
No, I think you've hit on a great point, Tianwei, which is they're breathing hot and cold. Because if you look at what's happened in the United States, all this information has been monitored and disclosed and to certain people. They're even monitoring.
And we also know other governments have been doing similar things to their own citizens as well.
And but America is supposed to be some beacon of freedom and freedom of
speech
and everything else. That's what we say. But in practice, what they've said is, we have an enemy. The enemy is terrorism. And the enemy is terrorism, and so we must suspend some of these freedoms in the greater good of identifying or getting to whatever to the terrorists. And this is where it becomes really hazy, and this is where America maybe has lost its way, which is when you break someone's right to privacy, which should be guaranteed, when you break, when you monitor all this information on people, then is Big Brother finally arrived, and why should they have that information? Are they using it correctly? Like I said, they're even monitoring video games to say that there's terrorists who are using video games in some way, shape, or form to communicate with one another. So this has gone to the absurd.
Exactly. We all know now, Professor Shi, as long as we're using the internet, all our track record are being left there. And therefore, whether it is your ID card number, it is you and your family's communication with your beloved ones, or it is your shopping record, or it is your personal interest. Everything has its own track records already. And therefore, how can we as individual citizens protect our rights when you have everybody else have your information out there, whether it's the government, whether it's the e-commerce, whether it is the hospital, everybody has your records. So how to protect your own rights? It seems like a mission impossible.
I would emphasize again the self-regulation and outside regulation. First of all, we need some media literacy, again, like I used the word before. That I would believe that most Western netizens has better literacy than Chinese netizens. Usually I have read some
still,
research.
Their private information are out there.
Yes, they have some kind of much stronger consciousness to protecting their own rights. For example, especially do online shopping. But secondly, I also think the government regulation should be based on the consensus of public debate. I would say Snowden's case, at least now 70% of Americans would think he is a traitor. So I think this probably grants some legitimacy of U.S. government doing something about him. But in China, we have the same...
People believe he's a traitor, but people at the same time believe that, a lot of people, I would say, believe the majority. What has been revealed is not for the individual rights of the citizens. So those are two different things. What is for the national interest and what is actually people have picked up from
So again, the government
regulation
should be based on the consensus, like I just said, like the 500 and also 5,000 we have just mentioned in China. There is no public debate or no actually consultants of public opinion, and some official just released that number, 500 and 5,000. So I think this is something we need to improve. Any kind of regulation of internet must be based on the public consensus and open public debate.
Right, and what's considered what's considered to be malice and what's considered to be not malice. I mean, who's the trier of that fact, and how do we judge it in a civil law system? In a common law system, it's more clear. In a civil law system, it has to be spelled out very, very clearly what's malice and what's not malice.
And legal system always catch up with the changes going on in our society. That, of course, is a big question. And on the other hand, if not, at this moment, what can individuals do? Gentlemen, fascinating discussion. I'm sure there are many other cases in the future that could be related to what we have just talked about. But we want to thank both of you for coming over to our studio. Edward Lehman and Shi Anbing, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for watching. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing.